This video is about word usage. It corresponds to section 7.11 of Applied Analog Electronics. Now, this section has got 68 different examples of word usage that I have found students sometimes making mistakes on in the writing they do for this class. That doesn't mean that everybody in the class makes all 68 mistakes. In fact, most students get most of them perfectly okay. But just about everybody gets one or two of these things wrong. And so it is worth going through and reading that entire section to identify those things that seem unfamiliar to you. Those things that you go, wait a minute, I don't do it that way. Because those are the ones that are going to trip you in your writing, things that I will complain about when I grade your writing. So let's take a look at a few of them. I'm not going to be able to do all 68 of them in a video. It'd be way too long a video. And it's not really worth going over every one of these because most students only need to see 5 or 6 of them. It's just that which 5 or 6 are different for every student. So read the whole set, but this video will just go over some highlights. Okay, so here's the list, and I'm just going to try and pick things, going through them alphabetically, pick some that are worth talking about. Above and below. When you're referring to figures or tables in your writing, don't refer to the figure above or the table below, because figures and tables are floating insertions. When you edit your text, when you move things around, the figures and tables will move around too, and suddenly they're no longer where you thought they were going to be. When you do things for a journal article, for a book, the publisher is going to move things around. You have no control over where they're going to put them. So never refer to things as being above or below or to the left or to the right, because that's not usually under your control in situations where you're doing technical writing. Different if you're working in graphic design or something, then quite often somebody does have control over where things are. But in technical writing, you don't usually. So never refer to figures as being above or below. Refer to them by name. And by that, I don't mean just by number, though that's what it looks like to the reader. To the reader, it looks like you're saying figure 3. But what you're actually doing in LaTeX is referring to the figure by the label you put in the caption. And by using that, then if somebody says, oh, we have to put in another 5 figures here, or there's some stuff I forgot to put in that section, your figure numbers are all going to change, but that's fine because you refer to them all by the labels that you put in the captions. And so when you run LaTeX again, it fixes all the cross-references for you. That's what you want to do. Always do your references by name so that cross-references and stuff get fixed automatically for you. And above and below are just not appropriate for talking about things within the thing. Same thing if you're talking about text. Talk about what you said in section 3 rather than the section above. All right, what have we got? Before and after. What am I talking about there? This is different from the above and below that was referring to places in the text. This is usually in diagrams. When you're in a block diagram, it makes perfect good sense to talk about before and after a block, because a block has got an input and an output, and there's a left to right flow through the block diagram. Things get changed by the block, so you can talk about the signal before the block, the signal after the block, and it makes perfectly good sense. However, when you're talking about a schematic diagram, before and after no longer makes so much sense, because schematic diagram is just an undirected graph. This is connected to this, is connected to this, connected to this, connected to this, and it's just showing you the connections between things, and there is no implicit flow of information in a schematic. So you can't talk about, I want the resistor before the transistor. Doesn't make any sense. Which resistor? This one? This one? This one? They're all before in some sense, because there's no before and after in a schematic diagram. So use before and after freely when you're talking about block diagrams, and never use them in a schematic diagram. If you want to talk about, I want the resistor, figure out some way that describes that resistor For instance, by name. I want resistor R7. Or I want the resistor that connects the gate to the output of the previous amplifier. Now, previous amplifier here is a little bit of the before and after stuff because we're basically going back to the block diagram level to talk about what's previous. So that's a little bit iffy. Better just to refer to things in the schematic by the names they have on that schematic. Name your components on your schematic and refer to them by name. And then you don't have to talk about before and after. Name the nodes too if you need to talk about the nodes. All right. Between. Between always takes two objects separated by and. Between A and B. You can't replace that and with a dash because a dash means that you're having a range. So from A to B. So if you do between A dash B, you're saying between from A to B. Well, between from A to B and what? I'm still missing the second object. Range is just a single object. So be careful with dashes. They're not substitutes for and. Nor are they substitutes for the pronoun to or the preposition to. If you put a dash between two things, you've got an entire phrase from A to B. So between always takes two objects, never three, never one. All right, what else? Skipping a whole bunch here. Countable and uncountable nouns. This is a very important distinction in English that people who come to English as a foreign language often have a lot of difficulty with because it doesn't make any sense. Things are arbitrarily labeled as being countable or uncountable. Fingers. I can count fingers. They're countable. Bread. Bread is uncountable. Why? It is. There are other languages in which the corresponding word is countable. But in English, you need to add a counting word if you're going to count bread. You have to have loaves of bread or slices of bread. And it's just an arbitrary distinction. You can find for any given word whether it's countable or uncountable by going to an appropriate dictionary. And there aren't very many that mark it. Oxford has some that do. And so if you're not certain, go to one of those dictionaries. Countable or uncountable sets a whole bunch of different flags for what you can do with a word. If it's countable, you can have a number of that thing. I can have a number of fingers. But I can't have an amount of fingers. Amount can only be used with uncountable things. And I can't have a number of bread. Number can only be used with countable. Many, only for countable. Much, only for uncountable. Fewer, only for countable. Less, only for uncountable. The indefinite article a or an, only for countable. And required for the countable unless you've got a definite article like the or demonstrative adjective like these or those. Unless you have something like that and you've got a singular one, I can talk about a finger. I have a finger. But I can't say I have finger. It has to have an article. But if I have bread, I can't talk about I have a bread. A can only be used with countable things. So there's a very important distinction whether you use an article or no article based on whether it's countable or not. Okay. Let's skip down a few more. Example of countable. Data. Is data countable or uncountable? Uncountable nouns in English are singular. Countable nouns, singular or plural. So, can I talk about the data is this, or do I have to say the data are this? Answer is, both are correct. 50 years ago, data was a plural noun. It was a plural of the Latin word datum, which is also sometimes used in English. However, words change in English. And data has become one that some people regard as a plural noun still, and some people regard as an uncountable noun, and so grammatically singular. I don't care which you use. You can make it a plural noun, you can make it an uncountable noun. either way, be consistent. And be consistent with what your partner writing the report with you is doing. If you both are using the word data, make sure you're both using it grammatically the same. So consistency is all I ask for that. You can use it as an uncountable noun, or you can use it as a plural noun. Okay. Demonstrative adjectives. I mentioned these, I think, just a moment ago. These are words like this, that, these, those. Those words can be used either as demonstrative adjectives, which is to say they're replacing an article. So it's replacing the word the. I can talk about these fingers. I can also use them as pronouns. I can talk about these without any noun. So it becomes a pronoun. It replaces a noun. However, in technical writing, pronouns are always a little bit iffy. It's very difficult sometimes to figure out what the antecedent for the pronoun is. So when I'm talking about these what? You saw my hand wave across there, but if you just heard me, you'd have no idea what I was referring to. So instead of using pronouns, these, those, this, that, use them only as demonstrative adjectives. These fingers, that hand, so that there's always a head noun there with them that helps the reader figure out what you're talking about. If you can't figure out what noun to use, then your reader hasn't a chance in hell of figuring it out. So do the work for them, put in that head noun, and never use them as pronouns, just as demonstrative adjectives. Okay, let's skip a few more down here. Fitting. A lot of students, for some reason, want to fit their data to a model. That's cheating. That's fudging your data. You always fit the model to the data. Think about it as fitting clothing to your body. You're not doing surgery to your body to make it fit the clothing. You're fitting the clothing to your body so that it's comfortable. You fit models to data. The data is sacrosanct. You do not change it. The model, however, is what you're using to try to explain, summarize the data. So, fit the model to the data, never the data to the model. It's fluff. There's another good word. When I mark fluff on your paper, it means that you have done a whole bunch of padding words, things that make your document longer while containing essentially zero information. It is important to note that. As we can clearly see, these sorts of phrases are perfectly normal in spoken English. They are ways that you hold on to the floor while you're trying to figure out what to say, to try and compose your sentence. They're placeholders. When you're writing, find those placeholders and chop them out. Just throw them away. It is very important to note that. Just tell them what you want to tell them. If it's really important, put it in boldface. Put it in a box. But don't say it is important that. Everything you say should be important. Okay, so watch out for fluff. Conciseness is a virtue in technical writing. Trim out anything that's got no content. All right, the words ideal, maximal, negligible, optimal, perfect, unique. These words don't take intensifiers. They are already as intense as they get. Ideal means the best possible. The very, very, very best you can possibly ever do. And all those varies don't make any sense because best is already best. You don't need any intensifiers with it. Perfect. That's the best you can get. It's perfect. It doesn't need to be more perfect, most perfect. If you're trying to do something that's sort of, well, it's not really perfect, you can say more nearly perfect, but you can't say more perfect. Optimal is a special case here because it's a technical word. People don't usually use it in ordinary speech. So when you use optimal, I want that to mean best, but best for a very specific objective function that you give me. Tell me what function you are optimizing when you're claiming something is optimal. In some of the labs we do, some of the designs you do, there are different optimal solutions depending what you're optimizing for. The thermistor lab has a best choice of a resistor for picking it to be linear at a particular temperature, or for picking it to be as sensitive as possible at a particular temperature, and they're not the same value. So if you just say, this resistor is optimal, it says that this is best, but best in what sense? When you use optimal, always give the objective that you're optimizing for. All right, input and output. They're both nouns and verbs. As verbs, a lot of people misuse them. Input and output both come from put. The past tense of put is also put. The past tense of input is also input. The past tense of output is also output. I input that yesterday. You don't need to do putted. You don't say putted when it's by itself. That shouldn't change when you add the in or the out to it. The -ly. I'll put this a lot of times on people doing things where they've taken an adverb, something that's an adverb already, and stuck an ly on it as if it was an adjective that we were turning into an adverb. Now, there are times when it's perfectly okay to turn adjectives into adverbs. I mean, you say something's quick, you want to do something quickly, great. Perfectly good usage of the -ly. But if something's already an adverb, don't add another ly to it. If I say, this is the next thing, that's an adjective. Or, this thing comes next, that's an adverb. I don't say, this thing comes nextly. And, in fact, I've never heard anybody say that. But I have heard people say, this thing comes firstly. Well, they usually say it, firstly, we do this. And that's just wrong. First is already an adverb. Second is already an adverb. Last is already an adverb. You do not have to turn these adverbs into adverbs because they already are ones. Now, it turns out first, second, third, last are both adjectives and adverbs, and this confuses people into thinking that they have to add an ly like they do with other adjectives. But because they're also adverbs, don't add the ly. Okay, let's do some more. Noise. Noise has a technical meaning in particularly electrical engineering, but in anything where you're dealing with signals. Noise is something undesired. It doesn't mean sound. It doesn't even mean loud sound. It means something undesired that interferes with your ability to actually get the signal that you want to get. So no matter what your parents may think of your taste in music, it's not noise because it's desired to you. Now, to your parents it might be noise because it's interfering with their ability to watch TV or whatever. But the important concept, what makes something noise, is that it is undesired addition to your signal. And we only use it really for time-varying additions to signals. If you've got just a DC offset or DC bias, call it an offset or a bias. Don't call it noise. Noise is quite often used just for what's sometimes referred to as random noise, where there is no inherent structure to the signal that's interfering with the signal you want. And so some people will use noise for random noise and interference for a different signal that's interfering with what you want. For instance, 60 hertz interference with trying to make a measurement of your heartbeat. I'm not that fussy. I'll let you use the term noise for things that are structured signals that are undesired, as well as for random noise. Some people will be fussier about the use of the word noise. But it never means the signal you're looking at. The signal you're interested in is not noise. We're interested in things like the signal to noise ratio. How big is your signal compared to that you want to see versus the noise, the thing you don't want to see. Okay, the word nominal here. A lot of people use the word theoretical when it's inappropriate. If I'm building a circuit and I say, okay, I went to my box, I picked out a 2.2 k ohm resistor, that's its nominal value. The nominal means what it has as a name. So if the manufacturer has labeled it 2.2 k ohms, its nominal value is 2.2 k ohms. I may measure it with an accurate ohm meter and say, oh, it's 2.19 k ohms. That's its measured value. Neither of those is a theoretical value. Theoretical means it came from some sort of theory. And there isn't a theory that says the manufacturer labeled it this. That's the name, the nominal value, not the theoretical value. So don't use theoretical unless you can point to the theory that is saying this is the value it should be because of this theory. Okay, prepositions. There's another good one. We have a lot of words like current, voltage, and resistance that get paired with very specific prepositions. When we're talking about a component, we can have the voltage across the component, or the voltage difference between two nodes. We can talk about the current through a component. We can talk about the resistance or impedance of the component. But we can't talk about the current across a component. We can't talk about the voltage through a component. Those don't make any sense. And when the reader sees them, they know there's something wrong, but they don't know whether it's the noun or the preposition that's wrong. If I say the current across, well, did that person mean the voltage across, or did they mean the current through? Which of the two is the wrong word? Spending some time trying to figure out what the mistake was and disambiguating the confusing statement makes the reader stumble. So be consistent, use the correct preposition with the correct word. Okay, pronouns. I mentioned this before. Pronouns are very difficult in technical writing if the antecedent isn't crystal clear. And usually it's the most recent noun that can possibly have been the antecedent, and it's often quite difficult to figure that out because people rearrange sentences, add extra things in the middle, and suddenly there's this it or them, and you think, oh, well, what are they referring to? This thing, this thing, this thing, this thing? Who can tell? So don't use pronouns unless you really have to. A lot of times you can avoid using pronouns by using a demonstrative adjective and a noun, talking about this resistor, that resistor. And if you can't figure out what is the appropriate noun to use there, then your reader hasn't got a snowball's chance in hell of figuring it out. Do the work for them, put in the noun, let them not have to try and guess what the antecedents are. One other thing about pronouns, quite often you will use we as the authors of this paper. That's perfectly okay. In fact, I encourage you to do that when there are multiple authors. If there's only one author, use I. We is only appropriate for plural. If you're talking about we did something, I need to know who those people are. If there's not multiple authors, you have to tell me who the other person is. Never use we for your singular person. It's only reserved for royalty in Europe. All right. What else? Pick another quick one. Separable verbs. There are a lot of verbs in English that have two parts that can be separated from each other, like set up. I can set up an experiment. I can set an experiment up. The up can be moved around. It's separable. But if I'm turning this thing into a noun and I want to talk about the setup, that's not separable. And this is shown in English by having set up as a verb is two words, space between them. Set up as a noun is a single word, no spaces. So, one word noun, two words as a verb. And there's a lot of words, a lot of these separable verbs in English that do that. I give a list of a few of them in the book. Significant. A lot of you want to use significant in the colloquial English sense of important, big, signifying something. It doesn't get used that way in technical writing. In technical writing, significant is reserved for statistical significance. If you say something if something is significant, I want to know what's the p-value. If you haven't got a statistical test, don't use the word significant. It's just become a special technical word that is only used for that purpose in technical writing. If you want to say something's big, say it's big. You want to say it's important, say it's important. But don't say it's significant unless you're talking about statistical significance. All right, let's skip down a little farther. Thus. Thus is not a synonym for therefore. Thus means in this manner. If, when you replace the word thus with in this manner, it doesn't mean the same thing, then you've misused the word thus. Use therefore if therefore is what you mean. Don't use thus when you mean therefore. And here's a word I hate, utilize. Don't ever use it. The word you want is use. Use is a perfectly good word. Use it. Okay, let's get down to the last thing here. Which versus that. In colloquial English, it's perfectly normal to use which for lots of different things. In formal written English, which is what we're doing in technical writing, there is a distinction between which and that, which is no longer made much in spoken English. Which is used when we have something that is non-restrictive. That is to say, it is providing additional information that doesn't change the thing being described. That is used for restrictive clauses, where it is picking out of a larger set of things the one that we're interested in. The one that we're interested in is telling you which one you want. If you say, I picked out the red one, which happens to be a ball, the which happens to be sort of thing is non-restrictive. It uses which. If I want to be restrictive, I use that. This also affects your use of commas, because the non-restrictive clause, which starts with which, has a comma before it. The restrictive clause, that starts with that, doesn't have a comma before it. So if you see a comma before that, something's wrong. If you see which without a comma before it, except for in certain special cases like questions and prepositions like in which, if you see a which before it without a comma, it's probably also a problem. So take a look at all your instances of which, that, and see whether or not you're using it correctly. If it's a restrictive thing, make it that, no comma. If it's non-restrictive, make it which and use a comma. Okay, as you can see, I only talked about a few of these 68 different topics here. Read them in the book. Those that you already know, great, you already know them. Those that are unfamiliar to you, read them again. These things are things that cause me to stumble when I'm reading student writing and slow down the grading, make me much more irritable when I do the grading. If you can clean up your writing so you don't run into any of these problems, I'll be able to grade it much faster, I'll be much happier with the results, and your stuff will be much easier to read. So, pay attention to the word usage.